Welcome back to the Virtual CISO. If you're new here, my name is Olivia and I am your host. Over the last two episodes, we've talked about how the traditional perimeter has disappeared. We talked about how identity is becoming the new control plane for security. And we've talked about the growing importance of trust in modern enterprise technology environment. Today, I want to focus on another major shift that's transformed how organizations operate. It is cloud-native architecture, because whether you're building SaaS products, modern applications, AI platforms, or enterprise services, there is a good chance that cloud-native technology sits somewhere at the center of that strategy. You have containers, Kubernetes, infrastructure as code, platform engineering, multi-cloud environments. All of these have fundamentally changed how organizations build software. They have accelerated innovation. They've improved scalability and increased agility, but they've also introduced a new challenge. How do you secure environments that are constantly changing? And perhaps more importantly, how do you secure them without slowing down the very speed they were designed to create? Because I think one of the biggest mistakes organizations make is assuming that cloud-native security is primarily a technology challenge. In many cases, it's actually an operating model challenge, and that's what I want to explore today. When organizations move to cloud-native architecture, they often focus on the technology transformation, new platforms, new tools, new deployment models, new infrastructure. But what's often overlooked is that cloud-native also changes how teams operate. Developers move faster, infrastructure becomes programmable, deployments become automated, environments become dynamic, and ownership becomes distributed. That's where things become interesting. Because traditional security models were built around stability, cloud-native environments are built around change. Resources appear and disappear. Containers spin up and terminate. Configurations evolve continuously. New services get deployed daily, sometimes hourly. And that means security can no longer rely on periodic reviews or static controls. It has become embedded into how the platform operates. This is why I often say cloud-native security is less about securing the infrastructure and more about securing the workflows. Because the real challenge isn't technology, it's velocity. And nowhere is more visible than in the conversation around Kubernetes. Whenever cloud-native security comes up, Kubernetes usually enters the conversation. And understandably so, it's become the foundation for many modern environments. But I think Kubernetes sometimes get blamed for problems that are actually governance problems or visibility problems or even ownership problems, because when incidents happen, the root cause is often not the Kubernetes itself. It's misconfigured access, poor secret management, excessive permissions, weak network policies, lack of visibility, unclear accountability. Those are operational challenges, not platform failures. And I think that's an important distinction, because organizations sometimes respond by buying more security tools, when what they really need is stronger operating discipline, clear ownership, consistent guardrails, and security patterns that developers can follow confidently. That's where secure organizations separate themselves, not through perfect technology, but through repeatable operating models. And speaking of misconfigurations, let's talk about one of the most persistent challenges in cloud security. One of the interesting things about cloud security is that many major incidents don't involve sophisticated attackers. They involve simple mistakes. For example, storage exposed accidentally, permissions granted too broadly, services deployed without the right controls, or policies configured incorrectly. And despite years of awareness, misconfigurations remain one of the biggest causes of cloud risk. Why? Because complexity is growing faster than visibility. Most organizations aren't managing a handful of resources anymore. They're managing thousands. Some even manage millions across multiple teams, multiple environments, multiple cloud service providers. And humans can simply review everything manually, which is why infrastructure as code has become so important. Not because it's trendy, but because it allows organizations to make security repeatable, to build controls into deployment processes, to establish guardrails before resources are created, And that's much more scalable approach than relying on manual reviews after deployment, because ultimately, prevention scales better than correction. But even with the strong preventative controls, organizations still need visibility into what's actually happening. One area I think doesn't get enough attention is runtime visibility, because there is a difference between understanding how something was configured and understanding how it's behaving. And in cloud-native environments, behavior matters. Applications evolve, workload change, threats adapt, access patterns shift, which means security leaders need confidence that what was intended is actually what is happening. Runtime visibility helps answer questions like what workloads are communicating, what identities are being used, what behavior is unusual, what activity represents risk. And interestingly, this becomes even more important in the era of AI, because AI systems increasingly interact with APIs, data stores, workflows, and services, which means cloud-native environments aren't just supporting applications anymore. They're increasingly supporting autonomous systems, and that introduces entirely new trust relationships, which brings us back to the theme we've explored throughout this season. Trust, because cloud-native security increasingly becomes a question of understanding trust at scale. So, what should security leaders focus on as cloud-native environments continue to grow in complexity? I think there are 5 things that consistently separate mature organizations from struggling ones. First, they prioritize architecture over tooling. Second, they automate governance wherever possible. Third, they invest heavily in visibility. Fourth, they create shared ownership between security and engineering. And fifth, they simplify wherever they can, because complexity itself becomes a risk. And that's especially true in cloud-native environments. The organization that succeeds won't necessarily have the most security product. They will have the clearest operating models, the clearest trust boundaries, and the clearest understanding of how security supports engineering rather than competing with it. If there is one thing I would love to leave you with today, is that cloud-native security isn't really about Kubernetes. It isn't really about containers, and it really isn't about cloud platforms. It's about creating operating models that allow organizations to innovate safely at scale, because technology will continue to evolve. AI will continue to evolve. Architecture will continue to evolve. But the need for visibility, governance, trust, and resilience isn't going anywhere. And the organizations that design those principles into their platform from the beginning will be the ones that are best positioned for whatever comes next. This has been the Virtual CISO. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you follow us and share it with someone who might find it valuable. As always, I'd love to hear your perspective. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, where I'll be sharing additional thoughts and continuing the conversation. Because security isn't about protecting systems, it's about creating confidence. I'll see you in the next episode. My name is Olivia, and I'm your host.